Great day, great day. Come on in the room. Come on in the room. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for joining. So, just as you are arriving, please like and share and tag someone to let them know that you are tuning in to Mindset Matters weekly Monday webinar. So, let us know how you are arriving as you join, whether you're excited, whether you are curious, whether you are being consistent with engagement and just some personal and professional development. We would love to hear. And thank you all for tuning in from the various platforms. As we have indicated in the past, we are tuning in live from Facebook, from LinkedIn, and now also YouTube. So thank you to those who have been able to connect to any one of those platforms. We appreciate your connection and we appreciate your support in tuning in. So continue to join us, and again, like and share and tag someone. And so, in the spirit of moving ahead and getting started right away, I want to just go ahead and get us moving and going, and just welcome you to this evening weekly Mindset Matters webinar. Glad you're here. Glad you decided to take some time out and join us from your busy day. And just before you wrap up for the evening, just being able to have you all engaged just a little bit with some development as we continue to move forward in our goals, yes, for 2026. So tonight is really about discussing a topic that affects every single one of us. And I will offer to you that it is the mindset of resistance, understanding what pushes back against your growth. Okay. And so I would personally say that, hey, I've had this challenge sometimes where I'm kind of resistant to oftentimes change, which we'll talk about a little bit, and or uneasy to move into the unfamiliar, and sometimes resistance to trying something again. So we'll kind of touch base on a little bit of that as we have this discussion tonight. And as we think of resistance, I want you to think of it as that individual force that shows up whenever we decide to grow. Yes, yes, yes. It's that voice that says, start tomorrow. Yes, it's that voice that says, you're not ready. Even that voice that says, what if you fail? That's too hard. Maybe this isn't for you. Okay. And my number one, you might be not good enough for this. Okay. So resistance often appears right before a breakthrough. It shows up when you're about to launch a business. Yes. Pursue a dream or a goal, or if you have a difficult conversation. Sometimes we got to have that difficult conversation. So resistance can be there. Setting a boundary, starting the healing journey, or even becoming that person that you are and were created to be. So all of those moments can pull forth a little bit of resistance from us, that sometimes it works for us, but sometimes it may not work for us, because the problem is that many people mistake resistance as a sign to stop. Okay. Let me say that one more time. Oftentimes people mistake resistance as a time to say, let me pause, let me stop, let me wait. Okay. But wait, what if resistance is actually a sign that you're moving in the right direction? What if it actually was a sign that you're onto something? Okay. So as we get started, I want you to just engage me for a moment and type in the chat, if you will, what is one goal or change that you've been resisting lately? What is one goal or even some change that you found yourself resisting lately? It can be one word, it can be a small phrase, but just put it out there if you're courageous enough to share. And again, I love this level of engagement because it allows us to see that we're not all in this as an individual isolating by ourselves. Everyone seemingly sometimes has the challenge. So you might see some similarities in others that they share in the chat that may very well be something that a change or something that you're resisting yourself. Okay. So thank you all for sharing, and thank you all for throwing those in the chat and just putting it out there as we get ready and get started. And so as we shift to the first segment that I want to delve into is I just want to normalize and give us a full understanding of my perspective of how I see resistance. So we'll start by really just defining what is resistance. So when I'm talking about resistance in the context of this particular session, resistance is the internal and external pushback that occurs whenever growth is required. Okay? The internal and external pushback that occurs whenever growth is required often disguises itself as fear, as procrastination, self-doubt, excuses, perfectionism, comfort seeking. All of those things can show up in certain ways as resistance. It's not always loud. Okay. Sometimes resistance sounds very logical. Okay. Sometimes it rationalizes to itself. So for you, it makes very good sense. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's responsible. And sometimes it sounds like waiting for the perfect moment. But often resistance is simply our comfort zone, really fighting and trying to stay in control of the moment, to keep us safe. And that, my friends, is that inner critic trying to bring us back to center and bring us back to that comfort space where it knows we want to be. Okay? We, from our inner coach standpoint, have to remind ourselves that it's okay. We can keep leaning forward. We can keep pushing. Okay. So the key thought that I want really for you to understand from this definition of resilience, resistance, if you will, is that growth really requires leaving what is familiar, and resistance is often the discomfort of becoming someone new. Okay. And so growth is going to have us leave that familiar, and it takes us away from our comfort zone. And that resistance is that tug forward that really requires us to really lean into if we're going to become something new. And as you've heard me say often is that if we're going to be that person on the other side of that yes at the end of those goals at the end of this year or 6 months or whatever that looks like for you right now, resistance is going to be part of that process. And so I encourage you to lean into that. And as you heard me say, resilience, a few minutes ago, resilience is what you see in the process of that resilience. And it's that capacity in us that we don't always know we have, but it really is. Keep leaning forward to see what the end will look like. Okay. And so I want to shift to the next segment, which is why we resist change. Because as in the beginning, you heard me mention this change. And why are we oftentimes resistant to change? Because we are wired for certainty. Okay? Human beings are actually wired for certainty. Our brain prefers the known versus the unknown. We like control. We like to know it all the way through. And adults want to know where you're taking us. We don't like going on this road of uncertainty. Okay? Even when your current situation isn't serving us, we still want to know where we're going. Okay? Even though you could be in a situation right now, it's not serving you. It feels like it's always felt, but we stay in it. Why? Because we're familiar with it. Okay? We're familiar with it. Okay? So we oftentimes stay in that situation. Okay? So if given a choice, we're often going to choose the familiar discomfort over unfamiliar possibilities. Okay? So think about that in your just day-to-day, whatever you might have going on right now. How often have you continued to choose discomfort because you're familiar with it over an unfamiliar opportunity or possibility that you could have right now? Okay. That's a mindset thing, folks. Okay. And while my current situation may be discomfort, it's discomfort that has been my normal. And to lean into the unfamiliar, even though there is the possibility that I could be an amazing individual on the other side of that, yes. Oftentimes that inner critic takes us down that rabbit hole of self-selecting out. And this point is where oftentimes we lose people. Okay? I want you to think about it. People stay in unfulfilling jobs. Okay? They stay in unfulfilling jobs all the time. People stay in unhealthy relationships. People continue to bring along for the ride limiting beliefs, negative habits, not because they actually enjoy them, but because they know them. They understand them. They're familiar with it. They normalize the process and the feeling and the emotion that comes to it. So guess what? Even though it's not serving, it's comfortable. And the unknown can feel threatening, which is why we won't come out of it right away. Okay? The unknown can feel threatening. Why? Because I don't know what that looks like. And I don't know what that feels like. And leaning into that unknown means that I've got to have discomfort that and sometimes I feel is greater than what I'm already feeling. Okay? And the long-term benefits of change often loses to the short-term comfort of staying exactly where you are. Okay? So again, think about that. It's all mindset, folks. Think about it. You know, sometimes we don't do you hear me say it. Those of you who have ever worked with me, I'm big on the pencil and paper exercise. And the reason I'm big on the pencil and paper exercise is because if I don't know what I don't know, but when I do know, I always know. And sometimes it's easy and better for me to write that out. And when I write it out and I put it on paper, there's a different level of accountability, but I can expand my mind further to explore things where I won't always do that when the inner critic is trying to rationalize some things in my head. Okay? So in the chat, I actually want you to type the word comfort if you've ever stayed somewhere longer than you should have, simply because it felt familiar. If you've ever stayed somewhere longer than you should have, type comfort in the chat, just because it felt familiar. If you've ever stayed in a space just because it felt familiar, even though you didn't want to. And again, thank you all for sharing and being courageous enough to engage the chat, because as you can see right now in the different comforts that is typed in the chat, we're normalizing this, which means, folks, we all in some capacity have probably done that before in our lives, in our businesses, in our relationships, and whatever that looks like for you. Okay. So, yes, it has happened. We have done it. Okay. And so now let's shift to the different faces of resistance. I want to talk about the different faces of resistance because resistance, folks, rarely announces itself. Instead, it wears these masks. And as you've heard me say earlier, sometimes that mask is fear. What if I fail? Sometimes it shows up like perfection, you know? It has to be perfect before I can start. Even procrastination, I'll do it later. Overthinking, I need more information first before I can make a decision to move on. Self-doubt, who am I to do this? Who am I to be able to make a choice or decision like this? The challenge is that these forms of resistance often feel true, folks. Why? Because when we rationalize it in our head, it's us pulling back to stay in the space that we are currently in, which is comfortable. And for some of us, each and every one of those have been normalized, so we stay there. Okay? But I want you to hear that feelings, as you've heard me say before, are not always facts. Okay? Many people spend years negotiating whether resistance instead of moving forward. Okay? Instead of moving through it, many people push against it. They'd rather go back and stay in discomfort of comfort. Okay? I want you to think about that for a moment. Have I done that? Have I been, doing that in the past? So we're really looking at resistance in a totally different way today, folks. Okay? Resistance is often a sign of growth. That's the next area I want to focus. Resistance as a sign of growth. And okay, so that might be flipping the script for some of you, because oftentimes when we hear this term resistance, sometimes we think, hey, there's a negative connotation to it. But right now, I want you to see it as a sign of growth, because here's the mindset shift. If resistance, and if we think about it, what if resistance really isn't your enemy? What if resistance is actually the evidence that you're actually approaching a growth opportunity? Okay? Think about it for a moment. I go to the gym, so let's just use that as an example. Think about the gym. Resistance creates strength. When we change the little novels on what we're going to lift and how we're going to lift it, there's one that is a resistance one. Without resistance, folks, the muscles don't grow. The simple principle applies to life as well. Resistance often appears because you're stretching, and you're stretching beyond your current identity. Okay? So, as I talked about earlier, I'm stretching toward that goal. And that goal that I reach, I have to be the identity that can sustain that goal. Okay? And so the resistance is stretching me beyond my current identity. Okay? I'm expanding. You're expanding. You're evolving. You're becoming. Okay? All of that matters in this process. So yes, resistance can actually be a sign of growth. Okay? The presence of resistance doesn't mean stop. Okay? It may mean that you're closer than you think. Okay? So take that little nugget. Doesn't mean stop just because it's present. It might be, hey, you're onto something. Hey, you're leaning against something. You're evolving, you're becoming, you're growing. All of those positive things that we want for ourselves as we move through life, in the world, in relationships, and even in business. Okay. So this next area of focus I want to go is how resistance shows up in leadership. Because yes, as leaders, resistance can definitely show up. And leaders do honestly experience resistance too. Okay. Leadership resistance sounds like something like this. And if we think about it in this terms, what if I disappoint somebody? What if I'm not qualified? Okay. Think about that. That's just circling the wagon. As a leader, some of those little conversations that I might be having with myself that really aren't serving me, what if I'm not qualified enough? The leaders who grow aren't the ones without fear. They are the ones who act despite of the fear. Okay. It's often choosing courage over comfort. Okay. Sometimes as a leader, you have to champion change, even though somewhere in here and here, it's tough. And so those are those moments where we have to choose courage over comfort. I've got to trust the process that the folks that may lead higher than me have this vision or this transformation or this shifting or this reorganization of the company that I have to be able to manage through and be okay with, even though it feels uncomfortable to me. Because if I don't self-manage in this process with my team, then it might not look well for me and my leadership effectiveness. Okay. So my courage is trusting the process, even though this may very well be uncomfortable for me. Okay. So every level of growth, folks, requires a new level of courage. We got to lean into this thing. And that courage is going to show you that level and next level of resiliency, as I stated earlier, that oftentimes we don't know that we have. And so I can't leave you with just giving you some tools. So I want to give you 5 ways to move through resistance. Okay. I want to give you 5 ways to move through resistance. And first and foremost, I'll start with recognizing it. Okay. As I say, we got to become aware. You can't overcome what you don't refuse. And what you actually, what you refuse, you can't overcome it. Okay. So you got to acknowledge it. And so I got to refuse. I gotta not refuse to acknowledge it. Let me say it that way. Okay. You can't overcome what you refuse to acknowledge. So I got to acknowledge it. I got to name it. I got to say what it is. I got to put it out there. Name the resistance, put it out there. Okay. Write it down, put it on your whiteboard, but so you can see it, so you know what it is. So when you identify it, you know how to shift and move in with courage. Okay. Focus on next step. Okay. Focus on the next step and stop trying to solve the entire journey. Okay. Just simply focus on next steps. Okay. In resistance, when I see the whole transformation process or all of what that change might look like, it may look overwhelming. But when I just take the next step, it seems doable. It seems manageable. Okay. So focus on the next step. Don't try to solve the entire journey. Take one step at a time. Just take that next step. Okay. Number 3, challenge the story. Okay. When it comes to resistance, challenge the story. Ask yourself, is this fear factual? What evidence supports it? What evidence challenges it? Okay. Pencil and paper exercise. Number 5, take imperfect action. Okay. I love this. Take imperfect action. Progress is always going to beat perfection. So I may not have it all together, but I'm going to move forward anyway. Okay. I may have a little bit of the information, but I'm going to lean into it. Okay. Action creates momentum. And you've heard me say this before. Action creates momentum. Okay. And then lastly, remember your why. The why is why I want this. The why is transforming lives. My why is being able to impact lives and shift beliefs one individual at a time. And when I am reminded of that why and why I do this work, I'm also reminded that it's not going to always be easy work. And your purpose has to always be much bigger than your fear, because I continue to lean into this work in spite of some of the pitfalls that I've had along this journey, some of even the challenges and opportunity that I see before me right now. I still got to lean into that why, and I still got to lean into that purpose. And so I challenge each and every one of you to also do the same. Okay? Because when your why is strong enough, resistance is always going to lose its power. Okay? And this is just some things I just want you to just consider this. Take a moment, folks, and just think about this. Where is resistance showing up in your life? Where is it showing up in my life? And what am I avoiding? What are you avoiding? What am I afraid might happen? What are you afraid might happen? Think about that. What positive outcome might occur if I actually move forward anyway? Okay? And what would my future self thank me for doing today if I'm willing to have courage to do so? So just do some reflection, folks, and think about that as you continue to move forward in this resistance phase. And as we wrap up today, I just want to say that the mindset of resistance is really truly understanding that resistance is not proof that you should stop. It's often proof that growth is actually taking place. Every meaningful transformation requires us to move beyond our comfort zone. And every breakthrough requires us to face, yes, a little bit of uncertainty. And every new level is always going to require us to challenge old limitations. The question isn't whether there's resistance or whether it will appear. The question is whether you will allow it to actually stop you. Okay? And so, everyone, I want you to think about that. Everything you want is often waiting on the other side of resistance. And sometimes it's that resistance that you've been avoiding. Or the other side of that, yes. It's there. It's there. And it's always going to be there because it's designed to kind of level us up, folks. And so I challenge you today to see your resistance as growth. Okay? And if you find yourself challenged with resistance from the various platforms that you might be tuning in on, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, or even YouTube, click on the link in the bio and consider joining my discovery call. And let's go deeper. Let's talk deeper about how resistance is showing up for you, and let's unpack. And as you always hear me say, I'm always loving to be your accountability partner and support you in the process, because I believe that the resistance that might be showing up for you is certainly also there for your growth as well. And I want to show and support you in that process. And again, you see the QR code on the screen. You can certainly scan that, and it takes you right to signing up for a discovery call. But again, I'm here to serve. And thank you for, again, the opportunity to just share with you today and talk about this mindset of resistance and really understanding what pushes us back against growth. We're flipping that script, folks. Don't let that inner critic talk you out of growing at the level that you need to be. And keep feeding and supporting your inner coach, because there's growth at the end of this journey for you. So thank you all again for tuning in and joining. And remember, keep growing, keep moving, and certainly keep becoming. This is Nick Dillon, the Believe Coach, and have a great rest of your evening and have an amazing week. Take care.